It's live from E Street Nation. Jim Rotolo, Dave Marsh, Greg Drew, Vinny Sorello, 877-70-BRUCE, 877-702-7823. Just got an alert on my phone. I guess it's my weather app. A bomb cyclone is headed this way towards the New York, New Jersey area. Bomb Cyclone, what a great name for a band, by the way. I don't know if there is one that exists, but you young people putting bands together, there's a name for you. Well, last week on the Live from E Street Nation, we I don't know if we necessarily celebrated National Disc Jockey Day, but we talked about National Disc Jockey Day, and we came up with the topic or the question of who were some of your favorite DJs from back in the day that were Bruce supporters, that you know when you were listening to FM rock radio or even maybe AM radio and you heard a Bruce Springsteen song, who were the big DJs that played those songs? And we collected so many names from legendary DJs from all over the country, and one of them is joining us today on Live from E Street Nation. It's Serphe Cowell from, he worked at WHFS for many, many years and was there from the beginning. He has a book out. It's been out for a minute. Check it out. It's called Surf's Up. It's spelled CERPHE. A Musical Life with Bruce Springsteen, Little Feat, Frank Zappa, Tom Waits, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and many more. Go pick it up on Amazon.com. Serphe, welcome to E Street Radio. How are you?
How are you? I am really good. I am so excited to be on with you today. I'm a big fan of what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for joining us. So we got into the discussion of DJs last week, and your name came up quite a bit. Being working at WHFS, a big radio station in the D.C. area. So what years were you there? Working there at the time?
I started full time in '72, and I was there till '79. But when when we started, and just for a perspective for listeners, at this point on FM radio, it was in the early days, the music we played was very subjective. It had really nothing to do with research or commercial pressures or corporate rock. It had to do with what determining was what we liked, what we as people on the air liked as musicians and bands. So it was freeform. So you could literally bring records from home, and I would do that frequently. I'd have a bunch of records under my arm and walk into the studio. That would be my show that day, and that's kind of the way it started at HFS. Throughout the whole 70s, HFS was freeform, it was progressive, and we were on a short list of stations in America that were doing that at the time.
I'm just kind of, I'm still kind of shaking my head over the fact that the DJ would bring in their own records and play. It's such a foreign thing.
And also put your own. I'm assuming put your own sets together, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, there was nobody.
Yeah.
There was no clock. There was no. At quarter after you have to play a X kind of song, or Led Zeppelin is at 25 after the hour. It was none of that.
Where else were you going to get the records? That's why DJs were so important, because you guys.
Well, it's so funny because
stuff.
we had, by today's standards, it's incomprehensible to think that as people on the air, we were given, the inmates were running the asylum. We really had incredible control. We could play and say whatever we wanted. The only job description that we had to do, show up in time for your show. I mean, that was it. And, of course, there were no obscenities on the air. We couldn't do that because being here in Washington, D.C., just down the street from the Federal Communications Commission, our job was to not get busted, to protect the license, But it was a wonderful time for me to get into the business. And so when I first met Bruce, I was still kind of a baby DJ. I'd really been on full time for a year and a half.
Sir, before we get into Bruce, I wanted to ask you this, just as somebody works in the industry. How did you get into radio, and then what made you decide that you wanted to do this?
I lost a bet
Well, now you have to expand on that.
I believe him.
A friend of mine, a buddy of mine, was on the air at HFS, and we had gone to American University together. We were students there. He's a couple of years older than I was, and he had a show. And he said to me one day, "You know, you love music. You're passionate about music. Come in the studio with me, sit in with the show, and see what it's all about." Which I did. And I was fascinated by it. I loved what he was doing. I loved the whole dynamic of it. And I'm watching him play whatever he damn well wanted to play. And it was like, I thought, geez, I can do this. And I grew up in Boston, so as a kid, I was listening to WBCN, so I was a big fan of what that station was all about. So, you know, I kind of, quite honestly, BCN was a huge influence to me, because I admired all the people on the air at BCN over the years. They were wonderful. So I get into it, and I'm still doing radio. I'm a one-trick pony. I mean, this is all I know. So
yeah. No, I could see what you mean. I mean, you're watching your friend do this, and it's like, wow, you get to play whatever you want, and you just go on the air and talk about music. And a lot of people think, oh, it's a pretty easy gig. Well, it can be at times, but you know, there's work involved. I mean, like you said, you have to make sure the FCC doesn't come knocking. And
well, especially in those days when you were putting your own music blocks together, it was a lot more creative and required a lot more thought.
Definitely. And also you wanted to, I mean, I'm sure you did this, Serphe. You wanted to turn your listeners on to new music. You wanted to, so they would keep coming back and say, "Oh, who's this and who's that?" So you were constantly paying attention to what was going on out there and trying to, keep your ear to the street, so to speak.
Exactly. We were championing a lot of local music at the time, and literally, I mean, we would play the Rolling Stones, and we would play the Beatles, and we would play Bob Dylan. We would play that kind of stuff.
Right.
But we wouldn't be, and kind of an early version of Americana, if you will, because really not far outside of D.C., you've got a tremendous bluegrass community. And in fact, in Bethesda, Maryland, where HFS was located, it was sort of the bluegrass capital of the country. And there were bluegrass clubs there that were huge. So the influence of sort of country rock, country and Americana was present, and we played a lot of that. And we were playing new unknown artists like John Prine and Bonnie Raitt and Tom Waits. And then in 1973, along comes this guy with this album, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And all of us on HFS just fell in love with the album. I mean, it was one of those amazing debut albums, and I began playing like Growing Up and Spirit in the Night, Hard to Be a Saint in the City, and Blinded by the Light. And the audience reacted. They loved what they heard, and it was first listen for me. I was really taken by Bruce's music.
That's interesting. We're talking with Serphe Cowell here on Live from E Street Nation, 877-70 Bruce, because those first two albums from Bruce, they didn't really shoot out of the stratosphere. They were there, and some radio. I don't know how many radio stations really supported Bruce early on. There were some, and you were one of them. HFS was one of them. We had WNEW in New York, and I'm assuming BCN
not really WNEW that much for the first record.
Right.
MMR in Philly was much more.
MMR in Philly was definitely the first.
Ed Shockey.
Or one of the first.
Yeah.
Ed Shockey was there pretty much from the beginning. So you were there. You heard this, you and the other jocks, you heard this, you heard this first album, and that was it. Do you think it had to do with the sound at the time and being where you were located, playing a lot of that bluegrass Americana music? You think it kind of, because it sort of fit in that?
I think so. But we were kind of into singer-songwriters. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of Bruce's music, excuse me, when you look at the liner notes and you read the lyrics, the poetry, the prose is it's wonderful. And in fact, over the years, I've rediscovered a lot of songs that I've listened to and that I've played on my show from the very beginning. But it's so cool. And in fact, listening to you that's one of the great things that you do on E Street Radio. You bring tracks, you hear tracks that you haven't heard in years, or maybe for a lot of listeners ever, and you get to rediscover this stuff. And then when you actually look at the lyrics and you look at the printed sheet, Bruce's poetry is amazing. I mean, he's I'm telling you what you already know, but he's just so gifted. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and one of the things, I don't know if you know this, Serphe, we when this channel started, Bruce actually gave us permission to play whatever we can find. So we've been able to find all of these outtakes and bootlegs and stuff that hasn't been released, and we were able to play that. So that's there's a treasure trove of stuff out there, and it's been such a great thing to have the permission to do that from the artist, to play, these songs, these early recordings and demos of Born to Run or Thunder Road, or, it just makes it that much more fun,
Yeah, absolutely. It, and listening to his body of music, it's so interesting. And in terms of what you just said about being able to play anything that you wanted, that you get the green light from him. I've always loved when Bruce would play cover versions in concert, stuff like When You Walk in the Room by the Searchers, or Double Shot of My Baby's Love, or even Twist and Shout or Satin Doll or something like that. Because as time went on, and we as an audience across the country got to know Bruce and become familiar with his music, it was always a treat to hear his take on other people's music. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, Detroit medley, and
yeah,
quarter to three, all that. Yeah, absolutely. So you're at WHFS. Bruce Springsteen, this new guy, is breaking on the scene. And when did you first meet him? When did he come to the station, or was it at a concert? Did you guys sponsor his show? How did it come about?
His first gig actually in the DC area, he backed up Chuck Berry at the University of Maryland.
Wow.
At a Chuck Berry gig, because Chuck never traveled with a real band. He would go to whatever city and he would get a band, because there were dozens of bands in every city in the USA that knew every song Chuck ever wrote.
Berry songs,
so he would just exactly, and he would pick up a band. Chuck's band canceled at the University of Maryland, and he needed a band. Bruce found out about it, and he said he'd do it, and he was the opener for Chuck Berry. But it was sort of, it was a Chuck Berry gig. But Bruce's first gig in the Washington, D.C. area was in the winter of '73, I think it was the... he played the Child Herald, which was a little club in D.C. It was a 19th century row house converted to a restaurant and a bar with a tiny, tiny little stage. And I'm talking tiny, it was like 15 feet square. So if you can imagine Bruce and the band on it would be like, the corner of a bar. Yeah, a corner, the floor of a bar. So he played there, and I went down to, I drove down from, our station was in Bethesda, and I drove down to D.C. It's about a 20-minute drive. And as I'm driving down, this was in the spring of '73, and there was a magic in the air that night. And I was there for a sound check, and he sounded great. And after he took a break, and I went backstage to say hello, introduce myself. I said, I got a radio show here in D.C. Would you like to be a guest? And he immediately said yes. Now, he couldn't do it at that stay, but he came back soon thereafter and was on my show the first time. And so as a footnote to this first gig that he did at the Child Herald in D.C., he played there 3 nights, and he and the band got paid $750 for the 3 nights.
Oh, big money.
So, big money. Don't spend it all in one place. But he took that opportunity to sort of make his mark. And the first night when he was there were not a lot of people there. More people the second night. Third night, there were a few more people. But really, maybe by the third night, maybe 100 people, something like that. All these years after, from that first gig where he was paid $750, the Child Herald, the club, took a photocopy of the contract and had it in a picture frame behind the bar for years and years. I mean, because this was this is a piece of history. I mean, this should be actually in the in Cleveland, the Hall of Fame. I mean, it was it's one of those things that you had to be there. But it was a wonderful gig. So anyway, he came back, and he was a guest on my show. He and again, bear in mind, this was a time there were not limos, there were not drivers, there were not, it was very, very low key. So when he came back to be on my show in Bethesda, he and the band get lost on the Beltway, and they drove around the Beltway twice. The Beltway is the road that goes around D.C. that circles D.C. And if you're not from here, it can be confusing. So he was lost, and he was about an hour late for the interview. But I forgave him, and it was a fun time. I mean, he came. I brought Clarence, Danny, Gary, and Bruce, the four of them, and they played Satin Doll and Growing Up, Saint in the City, and Wild Billy Circus Story on the show, acoustically. And I was in heaven. And this was, now I know that he was on WBCN with my dear friend Maxanne Sartori. He was on Maxanne's show about 3.5, 4 months before he was on with me. And I think the time when he was on BCN in Boston with Maxanne, that was his first radio interview ever. And he hadn't done a lot of radio. So when he came to us at HFS, he maybe had done a couple of radio shows. I couldn't get him close enough to the mic. He was moving. He kept, he'd sit back, a couple of feet away from the mic because he was so used to being on stage, working with an omnidirectional mic, working with the band. Yeah. And I kept saying, no, get closer to the mic, Bruce. But
don't you hate it when that happens?
Yeah, well, it does. It does happen. I had Bruce on the show with me after about a month and a half after he was on the cover of Time and Newsweek. And I set up the interview. I said, God, you're on the top of the world. Your Rolling Stone magazine loves you. You're on the cover of Newsweek. You're on the cover of Time. How does it feel? And there was a pause, and he just looked up at me and said, "Feels good." And I said, "Bruce, give me something here." But
this is a live radio show. We need a little something more than that. We're talking with Serphe Cowell here on Live from E Street Nation. I know Bruce he's shy, and so my next question was based on that so those early interviews. How much did he really participate? I mean, I know it might have been a bit difficult at that time because of his shyness.
He was shy, and I found that interesting because he was on stage. He had such a presence.
Right.
He was a newly signed artist, but he was able to communicate with the audience when he was on stage because he played in bars for years with a lot of different bands.
Yeah, he felt very comfortable on stage.
Absolutely. And on stage, he could get the entire room, and he did this at the Child's Herald, to be quiet and listen to his stories and his quieter songs, and then get them off their asses off the bar stools when he started to rock. And he was able to do that. So it didn't bother me that much that he didn't go on and he didn't, give a lot of details. I'd already interviewed a lot of interesting people. I mean, Tom Waits and Bonnie Raitt and John Prine, and some of these people were very talkative. Bruce wasn't, but again, that's okay. I mean, his music spoke for himself.
Right. Well, and that's all in your book too, which I definitely want to read. A Musical Life with Bruce Springsteen, Little Feat, Frank Zappa, Tom Waits. What was Frank Zappa like? Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and many more. It's called Surf's Up. It's on Amazon right now.
I have one just sort of radio question. What day part was your shift in?
I was on afternoon drive. I did a couple of different shifts on HFS. I did afternoon drive and also evenings. So, and again, it was like, freeform. I look back on this fondly now and think about, it's for instance, for all of us in radio that have been doing this a while, and it's like for you guys, it's pretty easy to romanticize that, isn't it? The fact that you could play whatever you wanted to play.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. By today's standards, if I would be in love with somebody, I'd play 4 hours of love songs. Mm-hmm. If I bought a new car, I'd play 4 hours of car songs. You know what I mean? It was like, it was very self-indulgent.
That's awesome. I'm jealous.
But it also gave each of the. I mean, I spent a summer in D.C., so I heard you, but you know, I was mostly in New York. It gave each of the individual DJs a personality, and you knew that if you listened to the 10 to 2 guy, you were going to maybe get one kind of song, and the 2 to 6 person would be slightly different, and the evening person would be, you know, slightly different, and you sort of, you know, knew what to expect because you listened to these people, and their personal taste came through in their presentation, and that was great. That to me was what made it fun.
You did get to know who the DJ's favorite artists were over a period of time. If you just listened long enough, you would be like, oh, that person's a big Led Zeppelin fan or a Bruce Springsteen fan or whatever. That was awesome about that. That's what you liked, that, you know, the DJ's personalities, and they championed, you know, some of their favorites.
Yeah, that's very true. I learned a lot from the women and men that I worked with at HFS. I didn't know a lot about blues, and a buddy of mine who was on HFS at the time, Damien, big blues fan and a great harmonica player, and he turned me on to all these great blues artists and blues bands. And later down the road, we had some of the greats on with us. We had J.B. Hutto and Muddy Waters, and you know, the list goes on. But that's what we did. It was sort of a cross-pollination between DJs on the station on different shows, and I probably, you know, sort of lit the spark with Springsteen on HFS, and as I moved on to other stations in DC, kind of the same thing, and followed Bruce. I mean, he went from that little club at DuPont Circle in DC, the Child Herald. He went on to play Georgetown University Gaston Hall, which was a little bit bigger. Then he played Georgetown University McDonough Arena, which was a bigger hall. Then DAR Constitution Hall, and on to the Capitol Center, and then, of course, FedEx Field, and the rest is history. But it was just interesting to watch the progression on how his music was accepted, and how it grew, and how the audience responded. And I mean, man, here we are. I mean, all these years, and there's so much passion. And again, kudos to you for what you guys are doing, because you're so important in this story, in this thread of Bruce and his music. Everything you're doing, they're good on you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, sir. You know, listen, it helps to have a channel where the artist is still, you know, he's still creating, still has projects still out there. I mean, the fact that he's given us 29 radio shows of his own.
I was going to say, he does his own freeform radio.
Yeah, he's got his own kind of radio show he's doing, which is really awesome.
Yep.
You know, that's a big help. And of course, you know, the 40 plus years of great music he's given us throughout his career it makes our job a lot easier when you have all this great music to play and talk about. Sir,
and it's fun to be
I'm
passionate about it too, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you know, anybody that's seen a Bruce Springsteen concert, I mean, passion is probably the first thing that comes to mind. Seeing not just him, but the entire band in doing what they do, and the crowd. Infectious. It's infectious. It carries on to you, and you take it back home with you, and you know, and I'll do that, and I'll bring it on to the radio, and then I have an all request show on Friday nights, and people will call in, and they have it too, and it's just it's a beautiful thing. It really is, and it's the reason I'm in radio is for that connection you have between the artist to you, and then you to the fans, of the listeners. I mean, like I said, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm glad you're doing it. I have a great story from a Springsteen show at the Capitol Center. Can I share that with you?
Yeah, please.
I was sitting with a bunch of friends, and also in the row that we were sitting because we had gotten tickets from the band, I was sitting next to Clarence Clement's parents. They had come up for from Tidewater, Virginia, where they lived, to see the show. And I introduced myself, and it was just, I said, "Hey, I'm a guy on the radio here in Washington," and I'm sitting there with them. And it was a lovely moment. It was a lovely show because it added a different level for me as a Springsteen fan, and as a friend to Clarence. I'd become very friendly with him over the years. And sitting there with his parents, but when he did his sax solo in Jungle Land, it was electric. I mean, it was always special with that particular solo, but sitting there with his mom and dad, man, I mean, you talk about a Bruce moment. It was amazing. I'll never forget it.
I can imagine that has to be. Oh my God, to have the parents there, be a part of that.
Yeah,
very cool.
It was lovely.
Serphe, this was fantastic. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk and share these Bruce Springsteen stories. And you have to come back. We need you back on.
I would love to. I'm so honored and I'm thrilled. And a week ago today, it was National DJ Day, and you'd asked the question about, DJs who would turn your listeners on, and you said my name came up. Do when you did that, I mean, I immediately got messaged by about a lot of people. My phone started ringing. I'm getting emails. I knew something was afoot, and then I found out it was you guys. So thank you.
My pleasure. You know what? I do have somebody. I have a caller that wants to talk with you. Let me get her on
Sure.
Here. This is Nancy in Maryland. Hi, Nancy. You're on E Street Radio with Serphe Cowell.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm going
Hi,
to say
Nancy.
the same thing. I'm going to say the same thing to you guys that I said to Serphe many, many, many years ago. A long-time listener. Since day one, basically, but first-time caller.
Thank you.
And something prompted me to call into Serphe that day, and the same thing prompted me to call you guys today. After he left WHFS, or when it, kind of ceased to exist, I don't recall when, he worked at a couple of other radio stations in D.C. I think DC 101 and Aero 94.7, I think, were the other two. And there was one day in my life that everything that could possibly go right that day, as opposed to going wrong, went right. I got promoted. A few other, personal things and work-related things that were just awesome. Like all the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. And I, coming back from lunch, ran into a cousin of mine. Mind you, I was in my 30s at the time. I had not seen her since I was like about 8 years old. And it was just the greatest thing to run into her. When I got back into my car and turned the car on, Serphe was on the air, and he decided to play. Now, mind you, these radio stations were not as freeform as HFS. There was probably a set list, and he would occasionally throw in his own song that he liked to play. And that particular day, he decided to play Point Blank, which is by far one of my all-time favorite Bruce songs. And I cranked it up, and I just had tears flowing down my face because it was just the greatest day ever. And it prompted me to call into him and thank him for playing it. And I remember him saying, "Isn't that just a great song?" And my response was, "Oh, my God, just one of the best." And he used that little snippet for other songs throughout the rest of his career there. Every once in a while, I'd be listening to the radio, and I'd hear my own voice going, "Hey," which was kind of cool. But just hearing his voice today just brought back so many fond memories. But now, hearing Point Blank, because of you guys, is not that unusual at all. In fact, I listened to it this morning. But I will say there is something about that song. Every time it comes on, something good is going on in my life. I wish it were a lottery number so I could play it, but it's just, there's something about that song, and it just brings back fond memories of Serphe, and certainly everything that he spoke to today about how you guys, and obviously with Bruce's blessing, can be such a free-form and eclectic, compilation of just all things Bruce. It's awesome. I love listening to you guys, and it was so awesome to hear Serphe's voice again.
Well, thank you, Nancy. That's awesome.
Thank you for listening to me so much over the years. I really appreciate that. That's very sweet. And I'm glad
No problem. I missed you.
Well, listen, you can still listen to me. I'm on Music Planet Radio, so you can listen to me all the time.
Okay, I did not know that. Well, now I know. Awesome.
There you go. Yeah, musicplanetradio.com.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Nancy, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for calling in. And now that you're a first-time caller, I hope you call more often.
Oh, I'll be a repeater. Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. All right,
you
Nancy,
guys have a great day, and be careful
too.
in that bomb cyclone.
Yeah, thank you so much. Serphe, thanks for joining us today on E Street Radio. And like I said, we'd love to have you back on again soon. So we'll do that
anytime.
At some point down the road.
Thank you again.
All right, and Yes. And the book, Surf's Up, A Musical Life with Bruce Springsteen, Little Feat, Frank Zappa, Tom Waits, CSNY, and many more. Go pick that book up. I'm sure there's how many incredible stories Serphe has in this book. You definitely want to read that if you are a rock fan, which you are. And like I said, Serphe, Cowell, thank you so much for joining us on E Street Radio. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, guys.